One of the first things we need to do is go ahead and get this emergency brake linkage taken loose. What you're seeing here is the actual linkage back into the cabin for the hand pull brake on the left of the driver's seat, assuming you're driving a left-hand drive car. This here, we've already got the lever loose, so you're not going to be able to pull this out not without trying to tweak this back. And what you're going to have to do is take this loose. This is the threaded section that allows you to adjust the park brake. And as you see, it splits off and goes to either side, and it actually works over on the back side through some cable sheathings that you can't see real well from this angle. But it goes into a cable sheathing here and here, and inevitably winds up over at the park brake caliper at the wheel. Simply undoing this one nut and getting it completely off, that way you can just leave this up here because there's no need to actually take this completely down. You can if you wish by just simply releasing it here, and that will let the cable completely loose, and then you can adjust again. That's solely up to you how you wish to do it. If you do it here, there is a kind of a release tab on either side, so you can do either one. You don't have to do both of them. And then you can simply slide it forward and then out through this opening here. I think you can see that. Let me get a little closer here. So you can see the opening there, and there's the tab you have to pull out of the way so that you can slide this head of the cable out. It's not the way I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go ahead and take the bolt loose and then just have it drop down out of the way, because we've got to take this whole plate off, and this will actually come off with the plate. I'd rather just have that hanging here out of my way. Not to mention, if you undo this tab, there's a chance you may actually break it. So I prefer to just undo the nut, and I'm going to readjust the parking brake whenever I put it all back together anyhow. If you are happy with where your parking brake is working, you can mark it and make sure you go right back to where you were. Once again, wax pen comes in handy for that. Or, like I said, myself, I'm just going to go ahead and readjust it, make sure it's proper. This car needs some major TLC, so just one more thing to do while I'm in here. The amazing thing is it's not leaking at the diff. Once again, Jag loves the 13mm. A nice ratcheting wrench makes this nice and easy. Look at there, didn't even have to take it completely off, just get it really loose and I could get that out of that loop. As you saw, it just simply goes, the loop of the cable goes right in here, and you just tighten it down. That's what we need right there. It's out of our way. We're ready to start taking this plate off. Once we get this cable loose, now that this is loose, it is on a spring, so you will have to kind of pull the tension back a little bit. But you pull that tension back just enough, and you should be able to slide that out of that opening. So there's that opening. So that head right there fits right in that opening, and then the cable goes through the groove, and then when it pulls back, that area here is much too small for that head to go through, and that's what holds the tension. Now here you're going to need a Torx bit. Looks like this is a T40 bit. So if you've never used these before, they are just simply a star, what is what some people call them, but their proper name is Torx. As I said, T40, which hopefully you can see that right there. And you take all 10 of these bolts off, and then you should be able to get this brace down and out of your way. So I am seeing some Loctite on these, so when you go back in, you're probably going to want to use some blue Loctite. Keep in mind when you're working with stuff over your head, as you may be seeing in this footage here, there's dirt, debris, and whatnot from over the ages. Be sure and wear some goggles or something to try to keep that from getting in your eye, because it sure don't feel good. And there's a good dash of sand right there. Just notice I put that one back. It's because this one actually has a little tension on it from this spring here. So I'm going to go ahead and take it loose, and I'm going to use this one to help hold the plate up. Surprisingly not hardly any tension on that at all, really. I was expecting that to have a lot more on it. So there we are. This one here is just finger tight. Hold it up off of our head. Get that one out. There we are. And there's our drive shaft all nice and exposed. We'll go ahead and get this drive shaft coming down here. So we're going to take the drive shaft loose. We're going to start back here at the back. You can start at the front too if you wish. Because once you get a bunch of this broke loose, you're going to have to take it off later. So it's not going to be one of these where we break it loose and just take them all off, because we're going to be using the transmission to our leverage in essence. You can also use pry bars wedging up in the yoke, but that can tend to put tension on the yokes. So I'm going to try to avoid that and just spin it around, put it in park, use the transmission while I try to break it loose. Now these are going to be extremely tight bolts, so just a wrench is probably not going to do it. I'm probably going to get some sort of cheater on here. Yep. So I'm going to have to get me a cheater on there. Let's see if I can get it to do it this way. So I'm going to use this 32 on the end of my 17 here. So the front bolt is a 13, the nut on the back is a 17. I'm going to use this 32 to catch it and use that to gain me some leverage here. And there we go. Alright, looks like she's broke loose. It's probably loose enough. See if we can get on this other one without having to rotate it around. Alright, I can get on it, but not enough to break it loose. See if I can get on this opposite side. Once again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get enough leverage from this angle. You're going to have the differential yoke sticking out there, so it can get in your way. Once again, another job that's a little easier with a 2-post lift. Lift doesn't get in your way near as much. Just not quite enough room. Looks like it moved a little bit, but not enough to break it loose. So now what we're looking at right here is the actual linkage. So this is where the cable from the shifter inside the cabin is hooked to. So as you move that through the J-gate, this is what moves to tell it what gear you want in comparison to what the J-gate is showing. Of course, if you get this out of place, it can be messed up. This one here, not so bad. This one actually has an adjustment nut here. We're only going to break this nut where it catches a hold of the lever. So we don't have to worry about getting it adjusted back to where it's in the proper position. But if you need to make adjustments, if things feel off a little bit, you can make that here by simply popping loose a nut here. So you have a nut here. It's time to take that loose. The nut on there, a 10mm wrench will fit on. So you get it on there, bust it loose, and take it completely off, because we don't want that causing any trouble for us to move this lever. Looks like it's spinning on me. So I'm going to have to get up in there and hold it with something. Once again, it's a 10mm on the back side as well. And as always, these ratcheting wrenches are handy. Once you get them loose, just ratchet them right off. They can fit in just about any location. Okay, so we're loose now. Technically, you could push that out and have it completely loose, but because we're going to be pulling this tranny, I'm going to go ahead and get me an 8mm wrench and take these 2 bolts out. That's the actual brace that holds the cable in place. Once I take that loose, this entire cable will be able to kind of drop down and get out of the way. On there a little tougher than I thought it was. I can get a socket on here. That should grab a little better. There we go. Go ahead and get these off. You probably see me put my finger on the back side of these ratcheting wrenches quite often. What that's doing is creating friction so that when the bolt's real loose and you try to do this, sometimes they don't ratchet real well because it just spins. The bolt just spins back and forth. And there we are. That's completely loose. And normally I would just put these bolts back in to the hole they came from so I don't lose track of them, but because this is coming out, I don't want anything protruding out that might catch on something and break. So I'm just going to leave them completely off and set them off to the side. Okay, so currently we were in park. So let's see if we can go into neutral. First gears that you move to is reverse. Second gear you move to should be neutral. So that should be neutral right there. Now a 2-post lift, you'll be able to turn the drive shaft, but because we're on a 4-post lift and the car is actually resting on its tires, we're not going to be able to turn that drive shaft until we get our jack in place and lift up the rear end of the car. Of course, with a 4-post lift, you want to have chocks on your tires that are actually on the lift that aren't being lifted. So you want to be careful about that. Should be able to see them right there. I've got a chalk in the front and rear of that tire so it shouldn't shift on me. So that enables me to go ahead and lift up the rear end of the car safely. And then I'll be able to turn the drive shaft where I need it to be so I can get to those nuts and bolts easier. I've got the jack in position. Just need to lift up the vehicle enough that the tires are no longer touching. So I'm hitting at the suspension points with this jack. And that's what we need right there, just enough to give the tires clearance from the rack. And that should allow us to move the drive shaft. Just like that. So there we go. Now we're in position to get to another one. But before we can do that, we need to actually put the transmission back into park so that it doesn't turn on us as we try to turn it. So there we are, back into park. Twist it a little bit to lock it in. We're ready to try to break that loose. And here we go. Another He-Man tightening it down to the point it won't break loose. While we're here on this point, you go to take the drive shaft loose, you want to mark it somehow. And you can see somebody's already marked this one with yellow paint. So the drive shaft is lined right back up on the proper location on the flange for the final drive unit. That allows you to get the optimal balance that was designed from the factory so that hopefully you don't have any vibration when you go back together. Now you have to do the same thing at the front side. You want to mark it somehow so that way you make sure everything goes back to the place it was in before for optimal balance. That one looked like it turned. And yes, it did. There we go. Try this one again. Definitely looks like somebody torqued the snot out of that one. Let's try this front side, see if we can get something better on here. Yes, there we go. Whew. We got a little bit lucky on that one. There you go, that one's definitely loose now. That one's definitely loose as well. So just have one more to break loose. Once again, I'm going to put the transmission back into neutral, rotate it around. I believe this is our last one. Yeah. Get that one ready to go. Put it back in park. Engage it. I think we're going to go with the 13 again on this one. Seems like I can get a better bite on it. Yeah, that's a lot better. Always nice when you get the closed end side of the wrench in. Alright, so that gets the back completely loose. We just got to take them off. But we don't want to take it off until we actually get the front side broke loose. Because that's going to actually help us hold it in place and not have this drive shaft hanging down, slapping around on everything else. Okay, so this side, you actually have a little bit different design. You actually have this torque disc here. So that disc, you can't see it real well right now, but we'll show you once we get it out. It's pretty rough. And actually when that goes, inevitably what can happen is the drive shaft just kind of wallers around right there. So we're going to replace that when we do this. We're also going to be replacing this piece here, I believe. I've got a new one. Depends on what it looks like when I get it out. But whoever had this car before me did run a bottom. You can see several marks here and there. So I'm not taking a chance that that was bad. So I just ordered a new one. And we'll most likely be replacing that as well. To get to this disc, we actually have to take the brace out. Once we take this brace out, of course now there's nothing supporting the transmission except for the engine. And the engine itself is somewhat loose. We're going to put a brace underneath here to help hold it up, and so we can get this down and take loose the drive shaft. What we have here is a transmission stand. I know you can't really see it quite yet. It's a little out of frame, so I'm going to jack this up until it gets under here and supports the transmission. Okay, so we're getting close. So at this point we want to line it up fairly square under our transmission pan here. And when you're setting up a transmission stand, you want to make sure that you have the positions for the belt strap or whatever it has to anchor the transmission to the jack. This one has a belt strap. You want to make sure it's on either side, not front to back. Because what we'll do, inevitably, when we're ready to pull this transmission down, is there's some holes over here for the hook to grab a hold of. Then I can wrap my belt strap around this hoop over here, or I can hook a hook on it, whatever I have. And pretty much I'm going to just use a come-along strap or a tie-down strap like what you would use for a motorcycle. And we're going to throw it actually up over the transmission and down on its opposite side. And that will help us to tighten it down and brace it to the stand. Not just simply support it with the stand, but actually tie it to it in a way. It's not necessarily going to keep it from falling off, but it's going to help. I've seen times that you know, they've gotten the transmission a little off balance on the stand, and yeah, it winds up being front heavy and it starts to tip, and that strap helps it to get on there so that they can grab the back side or do something to counterweight it. Now, like this one here, it has quite a few adjustments with these levers, and that can kind of rock the thing back and forth and help get the balance right as well as this crank here. I can crank this and you'll see as it tilts from one side to the other. So we want to get that fairly balanced. So to actually line it up on the transmission, we're going to back off on these thumb screws here just enough so that it can slide in place. And we're going to get these pins to line up as close as I can to either on a nut or just in a flat spot, not kind of off to the side of a nut. You either want to be square on it or you want to be off of it on a flat spot. Me personally, I want to be on a flat spot if I can get it. Less chances of it sliding off that bolt and causing a little looseness later on. So right now we're just going to eyeball it. We're going to jack the stand back up to the transmission. So I had to reposition the lift for just a moment. That's why things probably look just a little bit different. We're just a little higher than what the stand can handle. So now that we're down a little bit lower, I can jack the stand up a little bit higher. As you can see, we're starting to get our pins to line up around the transmission. So at this point, we're going to go a little slower. The idea is we want these pins to hit, like I mentioned before, in flat spots around the transmission. That way they get a good solid point to hit and hold it stable. What I've got going on is I'm already hitting the back, but I'm not hitting the front. That's where these tools come in. So now I can rotate this until it balances out. So I can center up on this transmission. I think we're pretty good right there. Just a little bit of change. And there we go. Now all 4 points are hitting on the transmission. At this point, I'm going to back off just a hair so I can go ahead and tighten these down. Don't want these loose. I'm tightening down the thumb screws. And now we're good. They're all tight. Now I can actually push down. As you see, the transmission just lifted. So you can see this transmission bushing? Yeah, it's completely gone. So we've got a new one for that. So at this point, I'm going to get what I need to bust all this loose. Looks like we've got a 10mm head on that one, and probably the 40 Torx again. Let me double check. No, it's a 50, so a T50 is what holds this on here. There's 2 bolts. Looks like they are using red Loctite on this. So we'll need to make sure we use some Loctite when we go back together. Okay. So I don't know how well y'all can see that, but yeah, it definitely blew out the 2 side mounts completely. So that's just pretty much sitting in there bouncing around. It's not a horrible thing. The car probably could have drove for 7 more miles and really not had much of a problem other than just maybe a little vibration and whatnot from that. Not something I would want to leave there real long, but you definitely want to replace it as soon as you can. And who knows how long they rode with that, because that looks pretty smooth. They rode on it for a while. Not advisable. It looks like it's got a 10mm right up in the center. Yep, 10mm. So to do a transmission support or transmission mount, you're going to need a 10mm and a 50mm Torx. Apparently been leaking a little transmission fluid back there, it looks like. You can see my fingers are shiny. I don't know if you can tell the color, but it looks somewhat red there, reddish brown. So it's probably transmission fluid. After I took a little sniff of it, it's definitely transmission fluid, which you can already see it all across the back pan here. So not too surprising. Now if I were to leave this transmission loose like this all night, I would not leave the jack here to hold it in place. Now I don't mind leaving the jack here overnight, that's fine, but it's not going to be the thing holding the jack or the transmission in its spot. That you would put the brace back in or get a proper stand to hold it in place. Also make sure that your lift is set on its braces so that if it loses any hydraulic pressure, it will rest on the stops, not on the ground and flip the car off because the stand's underneath it. I have actually seen that more than once. And it does not make for a happy customer if you're working in a shop and it's their Cadillac. There we go. All nice and exposed so we can get to those bolts. So at this point, quite literally, the only thing holding this transmission up is this stand. The engine does have the engine mounts in place, but I'm not sure what kind of condition they're in. They could be as bad as this transmission. So if I was to let this brace down, it could be that this thing tries to come down and shimmy back on me. So I want to make sure I keep it braced up here, not let the tension get lost that's holding it up. So be sure and make sure your jack's in good operating order. Preferably, if you've got them, throw you some support stands here to help hold it, just in case the jack gives. But we're going to see if we can get this broke loose out of here as quickly as possible so I can put that brace back in place to hold this transmission up. Alright, looks like I was able to get a 3/4 on there. Metric equivalent is a 19mm. Let's see if we can get these broke loose. I'm going to use a nice big cheater bar on this end. So it is spinning on the back side as well, so I'm going to have to see if I can get me a wrench in there and hold it. I believe it's a 19 on the back side too. It seems like they're all wanting to move somewhat freely. I'm actually going to take loose the electronic cable here. What this is. Now this is the cable that communicates with the transmission control module so that it knows when to shift automatically. It'll help communicate all that stuff to the engine control module and traction control module and all that fun stuff. That's definitely loose. I'm going to get me a ratchet on here now. Now that bolt will not come out. There's just not enough distance between the back of the transmission and this torque disc here. We're going to have to leave it back as far as we can get it. And as soon as we can get the drive shaft out of the way, then we can finish taking off this disc. And we'll probably wait to do that until the transmission is completely out. But if I was going to replace it, get the drive shaft out of my way, then I can do the rest of them and get the disc out, put the new disc in. So there is a flat washer and a nut on that. As I said, you just push this back as far as we can get it, but it will not come completely out. Last but not least, we got to get this bottom one. Bottom one, where it's at, just a little difficult to get to because of this plate. So once again, we're going to go back into neutral, rotate it around. Put it back in park. Slot it back in. Now we're ready to take this one completely off. Here we can push the drive shaft in. It's got a flexible joint right there. And there we are. We're actually off of the transmission. So what we can do here is that we're hitting this brace and we can't quite get down like we want to. We're going to have to actually lower the transmission just a little bit. So we're going to work the controls here to lower this transmission. Where we want to be gentle and try to come down as smooth as possible. So there we are. So I'm going to jack it back up so not to put too much tension on anything else. It's nice in its pocket. The drive shaft is hanging loose right in front of the camera. So I'm going to put my brace back on. That way I don't have to worry about my transmission falling. I'm not tightening these down with a torque wrench or anything like that right now. I'm just simply running them all the way in, making sure they're just as deep as I can get them, finger tight. We're talking somewhere around close to 1 inch worth of thread run in. So the chances of that coming out on a non-moving car is pretty slim. So once again, I'm putting my connector back in place, because I don't want a bunch of corrosion and nastiness to get into those pins. I'm just going to make sure this cable for the shifter stays off to the side as I once again lower the transmission down, gentle, and there we go. Transmission's not going anywhere. It's still bolted to the engine. This brace isn't going anywhere. It's sitting at a slight angle now, but it's not going anywhere. This will allow me to go ahead and get the brace out of the way and go ahead and put the car down for the evening as soon as I get this drive shaft out. I'll give you a little closer look here. This is the piece I was talking about that will allow you to expand and contract the drive shaft so you can get a little bit of that play when you're going to take it out and put it back in. Be sure not to let this come completely out. I'm not positive if this has something to stop it from doing so, but you definitely don't want it to do that. Go ahead and check this out as well. This is a piece of rubber. It really shouldn't wear too much because there's really not a whole lot of movement other than just a tiny bit of that while the car is actually driving. But go ahead and check it out. Make sure it's not split or cracking too much, because it may be something you want to look at going and replacing at this time, because you got it out. Like I said, generally you're not going to see a problem with that, but it's just a good thing to look at while you've got it out. Same thing off in here. This is the spindle. Once again, it's going to have a little bit of movement in and out. Really shouldn't have to worry about too much anything there, but maybe put a little extra, a little red axle grease down off in there before you put it back in. Not much. I'd say a little bit on your finger and kind of smear it around there. Give it a little extra lubrication. It's probably been some time since it was lubricated. So we're back to the rear of the axle mount, to the point now that all these are broken loose, but they need to be actually taken out. So you didn't just see what I did, but I just put the nuts and washers back on those bolts that we took loose on that torque disc, just so that they don't get lost. And we'll worry about those later when we actually take that off the transmission when it's out of the car. Technically, you could pass on what I'm doing back here in the back. You don't have to take the drive shaft completely out to drop the transmission. As you just saw, the drive shaft was hanging down. But I am wanting to go through here and kind of clean up some things and double check on things that are a little easier to see and do when the drive shaft is out of the way. Not to mention, I don't want to have the risk of, if something does happen, that the drive shaft doesn't get damaged by the floor or whatnot going up and down with the car a lot, because it does hang down. You could tie it off with a rope and keep it up out of the way once you have the transmission out, but I'm just going to get it out of the way completely so I don't have to worry about it. So what you just heard was me zip tying that drive up just a little bit, because it was kind of in the way, hanging all the way down. So I just use a zip tie. You can use a bungee or whatever you want to kind of tie it up. Got that really loose, so now I'm going to hold up the drive shaft as I take this last one out. There we go. So now slide the drive shaft forward and it's completely out. And there we go, one drive shaft out. So that's your process for removing a drive shaft.